Chapter 1. The River of Time and the Compass of Principles. Imagine for a moment that you have just woken up in a small boat. You are already in motion, carried forward by a powerful, unyielding current. This is the deeply adventurous journey we call life, stretching out before you with vast, uncharted horizons that you cannot possibly predict. You look around and quickly realize a fundamental truth about this journey. Time is exactly like that river, relentlessly carrying us forward into inevitable encounters with reality. You cannot drop an anchor to freeze time, you cannot paddle backward into the past, and you absolutely cannot avoid the encounters rushing toward you. The water will bring calm stretches, sudden rapids, and massive, unavoidable boulders. Every single one of these encounters will require you to react. Throughout your lifetime, you are going to be forced into millions of these encounters, requiring you to make millions of individual decisions. Some will seem trivial, like adjusting your grip on the oars, while others will be monumental, like choosing whether to risk a dangerous tributary or stay on the familiar, crowded main channel. Ultimately, the quality of your decision-making will directly determine the quality of your entire life. It is a simple, unforgiving equation. Good decisions will reward you with beautiful outcomes, and bad decisions will inevitably hurt you. Think about a person who has spent a decade relentlessly climbing a professional ladder. They followed every piece of conventional advice, worked exhausting hours, and sacrificed their health and relationships, all to reach a specific destination. But when they finally get there, they look around and feel entirely hollow. They realize they have been navigating by someone else's map. Then, an unexpected rapid hits. A massive industry shift, a sudden termination, or a severe physical burnout. The boat flips. In the freezing water of that crisis, they face a defining encounter. Do they panic and desperately try to rebuild the exact same life that made them miserable? Or do they use this painful reality to fundamentally change their trajectory? To make the right choice in the chaos of that freezing water, they cannot rely on blind instinct or societal expectations. They need something deeper and far more reliable. They need a compass. The most important things you can possibly possess on this turbulent journey through life are good principles. Principles are not rigid rules, temporary trends, or empty motivational slogans. They are fundamental truths that serve as the foundation for behavior. They are essentially recipes for success, providing proven ways of successfully dealing with the harsh and beautiful realities that you will inevitably encounter. When you look at any person who has achieved true, lasting fulfillment and mastery over their circumstances, you will find that they operate on a core set of principles that consistently make them successful. But here is the absolute catch. You cannot simply borrow someone else's compass and expect it to point to your true north. Unless you want to live a life that is entirely directed by others, a life that quietly boxes you in and suffocates your unique potential, you must take the helm. You need to actively decide for yourself what it is you truly want to do, and perhaps more importantly, you need to summon the immense courage required to actually do it. It is terrifying to chart your own course. It means taking full responsibility for your own shipwrecks, and no longer having the luxury of blaming the current or the other boats around you. This realization leads to the absolute most important foundation for navigating the river. To survive and thrive, you must commit to thinking for yourself, while simultaneously remaining radically open-minded. Thinking for yourself means rejecting the noise of the crowd, questioning inherited beliefs, and refusing to accept the default path just because it looks safe. Being radically open-minded means accepting that your individual perspective is inherently limited, that you will frequently be wrong, and that the river's currents do not care about your ego. You must hold your convictions fiercely, but be willing to instantly update them the moment reality proves you wrong. The current is moving, the encounters are coming, you are in the boat, and the journey is happening right now. Chapter 2. The Hyper-Realist's Advantage. To navigate the river of life effectively, you need more than just the willingness to steer. You need to see the water exactly as it is. It sounds incredibly simple, but knowing what is true is absolutely essential for making good decisions. This is not about seeking some abstract, mystical truth. By knowing what is true, I mean possessing a deep, unflinching understanding of how reality actually works. We humans did not create the laws of nature that we are forced to live by in order to be successful, but if we can clearly understand these fundamental laws, we can use them to achieve our ultimate goals. Consider someone who pours their soul into opening a visionary business. perhaps an artisanal, slow-dining restaurant in the heart of a bustling, fast-paced financial district. They have a brilliant dream. They invest their life savings, design a breathtaking space, and craft a meticulous menu that takes hours to prepare and enjoy. But when the doors open, the seats remain tragically empty. The lunchtime crowd, comprised of stressed office workers, walks right past the beautiful windows to buy quick, pre-packaged food next door. The restaurant owner's immediate reaction is deep frustration and resentment. They blame the customers for lacking refined taste. They curse the local culture for being too rushed and unappreciative of quality. They exhaust their emotional and financial energy wishing the world were different, complaining that the reality of the market is not to their liking. This is a very natural human response, but it is also a fatal trap. The owner is essentially standing at the bottom of a cliff, screaming at gravity because they cannot float to the top. As long as they remain fiercely attached to how they believe the world should be, they will continue to suffer. But what happens if they take a deep breath and truly embrace the cold, hard truth? What if they accept that the people in this specific neighborhood have exactly 20 minutes to eat, and no amount of culinary perfection will change the unyielding ticking clock of a corporate lunch break? That is the exact moment of transformation. They stop fighting reality and start working with it. They adapt their high-quality ingredients into a premium, sophisticated grab-and-go format. They align their grand dream with the unbending laws of their environment. By embracing the truth they initially hated, they save their business and ultimately achieve their goal of feeding people beautiful food on a massive scale. This fundamental shift in perspective is what makes someone a hyper-realist. A hyper-realist is someone who fully embraces reality and works with it skillfully exactly as it is, rather than someone who wastes their precious life wishing it were different and complaining that it does not suit their preferences. Being a hyper-realist does not mean giving up on your grandest visions or settling for mediocrity. It actually means the exact opposite. It means understanding that dreams alone are merely wishes floating in the ether, highly vulnerable to the harsh winds of the real world. To truly manifest what you want, you must apply a specific, unwavering formula. Dreams plus reality plus determination equals a successful life. Your dreams provide the beautiful destination you are aiming for. Your determination provides the relentless engine required to get there. But reality is the raw terrain you must actively cross. If you ignore the terrain, your engine will simply destroy itself against the rocks. No matter what path you ultimately choose to walk down, you absolutely must embrace your realities, especially the ones you desperately wish were not true. It is remarkably easy to accept the beautiful truths of life, our natural talents, our lucky breaks, our early victories. It is agonizing to accept the ugly ones, our inherent weaknesses, a shifting economy, a failed venture, or the realization that a chosen path is a dead end. But it is only in the quiet, humble acceptance of these harsh realities that true progress is forged. When our deeply held desires violently clash with the unyielding nature of reality, it produces friction, and that friction inevitably manifests as profound emotional pain. Understanding what to do with that pain is the next great threshold you must cross. Chapter 3. The Alchemy of Pain. When you embark on any meaningful journey, you are going to crash. It is not a probability, it is an absolute certainty. At first, our natural instinct is to view these crashes, our complicated problems, our undeniable mistakes, and our glaring personal weaknesses, as purely negative experiences. They cause us profound emotional and psychological pain. Most of this pain stems not from the failure itself, but from the exhausting mental gymnastics we perform wishing the failure had never happened. We spend our vital energy desperately wishing we didn't have these weaknesses rather than figuring out how to deal with them. But if you want to evolve, you have to fundamentally change your relationship with this discomfort. You must realize that these pains are not unfair punishments from the universe. They are urgent, highly specific messages signaling that you need to reflect deeply on your reality. Consider a fiercely dedicated architect who spends 5 years designing what they believe will be their magnum opus, a sprawling avant-garde public plaza in the center of a historic city. They pour every ounce of their talent into the aesthetic design, convinced it will completely revolutionize how people interact with urban spaces. During the early planning phases, community leaders gently voice concerns that the design lacks natural shade, comfortable seating, and safe accessibility for the elderly. The architect, driven by artistic ego and deeply attached to their rigid blueprint, dismisses these concerns as a lack of grand vision. They push forward, ignoring the subtle warnings reality is offering them. Opening day arrives, the ribbons are cut to great fanfare, and then a deafening silence follows. Over the next year, the plaza remains almost entirely empty. A sun-baked concrete wasteland actively avoided by the very citizens it was meant to serve. The failure is public, undeniable, and excruciatingly painful. The architect's reputation plummets. In the immediate aftermath, they are consumed by defensive agony. They desperately want to blame the city for lacking sophisticated taste. They want to blame the changing weather patterns. They want to hide away, change careers, and never draw another blueprint as long as they live. The pain is a heavy, suffocating blanket that obscures their vision. But after months of this bitter stagnation, a necessary shift occurs. The architect forces themselves to walk through the empty plaza at high noon. They sit on the glaring, uncomfortable concrete. They finally stop fighting the reality of their failure and allow themselves to feel the sharp sting of their own arrogance. Instead of asking why the world is so unfair, they ask a simple, brutally honest question. What must I do in this exact situation next time? They realize their fatal weakness was prioritizing their aesthetic ego over actual human utility. By sitting voluntarily in the fire of their own mistake and reflecting honestly, they solve the puzzle. They extract a brilliant, shining gem from the wreckage, a new guiding principle that form must always bow to the realities of human comfort. They carry this gem into their next decade of work, designing spaces that are deeply loved and perpetually crowded precisely because they learn to design around reality rather than ego. This is the profound alchemy of human evolution. When you learn to view your problems like intricate puzzles, everything changes. The puzzle is simply figuring out what you should do differently when a similar situation arises in the future. And the gem you receive for solving that puzzle is a newly minted principle that will protect you and propel you forward for the rest of your life. Every single time you crash, you have the opportunity to learn something vital, get slightly better, and ensure you crash just a little bit less next time. If you can force yourself to do this over and over again, an extraordinary transformation takes place. You actually learn to love the process, even the painful crashing part of it, because you know the crash is just the necessary toll you pay to acquire the next gem. This brings us to one of the most powerful, life-altering equations you will ever encounter. Pain plus reflection equals progress. Pain by itself is just meaningless suffering. Reflection without pain is often just intellectual daydreaming, lacking the emotional leverage required to force a change. But when you take the raw, burning sting of a recent failure and combine it with cold, objective reflection, you create unstoppable forward momentum. You stop wishing your weaknesses did not exist and start building systems to overcome them. And once you have collected enough of these gems from your own crashes, you begin to see that being successful is not some magical random occurrence. It is just a matter of following a reliable, mechanical process. Chapter 4. The 5 Steps to Evolution. Discovering how to extract wisdom from your own pain is a profound awakening, but it leads to an even more empowering realization. Success is not a random lottery, nor is it reserved for the chosen few. It is simply a matter of operating in harmony with a fundamental law of nature. If you look closely at any thriving business, any wildly successful individual, or even the biological evolution of life on Earth, you will see the exact same mechanism at play. It is a continuous 5-part cycle of adapting or dying. Once you understand this cycle, you stop feeling like a victim of circumstance and start operating as the architect of your own reality. The first movement in this continuous loop is setting your goals. Imagine life as an infinitely massive, lavish banquet. The tragedy of human desire is that while you can have almost anything you want from this banquet, you absolutely cannot have everything. If you try to pile every single dish onto your plate, you will stumble, drop the meal, and walk away starving. You must make hard, agonizing decisions about your priorities. Consider a deeply passionate baker who runs a beloved local shop. They want to maintain the soul of a small-town artisan. But they also want to build a massive regional distribution network, and they want to personally oversee every batch of dough, and they want to be home at 5 o'clock every evening. This is a collision of incompatible desires. To move forward, the baker must rigorously evaluate their passions, their strengths, and their weaknesses, and then ruthlessly prioritize. They must choose the one towering goal that truly defines their path, fully accepting that saying yes to this goal means saying no to 100 other beautiful possibilities. As soon as you commit to a meaningful goal and begin sprinting toward it, you will immediately trigger the second movement of the cycle. You will collide with problems. There are always problems standing in the way of your ambitions, and they are typically very loud and very painful. The baker decides to scale up to regional distribution, but within a month the system fractures. The bread is arriving late to new vendors, the quality is slipping, and the baker is sleeping 3 hours a night on flour-dusted floorboards. The pain is immense. At this juncture, most people make a fatal error. To escape the pain, they quietly lower their goals, convincing themselves they didn't really want to grow anyway. But if you want to evolve, you must do the exact opposite. You must bring the problem into the harsh light of day, clearly identify it, and absolutely refuse to tolerate its existence in your life. Not tolerating the problem leads directly into the third, and arguably the most difficult, movement, diagnosis. This is where you must act like a cold, objective surgeon examining a wound. It is human nature to look for external scapegoats. The baker desperately wants to blame the heavy traffic, the unreliable weather, or the suppliers. But diagnosing a problem means digging past the superficial symptoms to uncover the absolute root causes. Very often, when you dig deep enough, the root cause staring back at you is your own personal weakness. The baker, if they are brutally honest, must admit that the bottleneck is not the traffic. The bottleneck is their total lack of logistical expertise and their suffocating need to micromanage every moving part. This evolutionary journey requires you to look in the mirror, acknowledge exactly what you are doing wrong, and accept that you must change. Once the painful truth of the diagnosis is exposed, you enter the fourth movement, design. You must step back from the chaos and view your life from a higher altitude. If the problem is a massive boulder blocking your path, the design phase is where you sit down with a piece of paper and sketch a map around it. The baker realizes they cannot suddenly become a logistics genius overnight, so they design a new operational structure. They plan to hire an experienced supply chain manager, relinquish control of the delivery routes, and build a system where the business relies on specialized roles rather than the frantic energy of one exhausted owner. The design is a specific, actionable blueprint intended to bypass the root cause of the failure. Finally, the fifth movement is execution. You must simply do it. A brilliant design sketched on a whiteboard is entirely worthless if it remains a hallucination. You have to push yourself into the discomfort of taking action. The baker must actually go out, spend the money, interview candidates, hand over the keys to the trucks, and force themselves to stay in the kitchen while someone else handles the road. It requires discipline, grit, and an unwavering commitment to the plan you designed. When you successfully push through these 5 phases, when you set a goal, confront a problem, diagnose the root cause, design a solution, and execute the plan, you ascend. You achieve your ambition. The baker successfully establishes a massive regional network, but the journey does not end there. By successfully completing the cycle, you have naturally elevated yourself to a higher altitude of success, and at this new magnificent height, the air is thinner and the stakes are heavier. You will immediately encounter entirely new, much larger challenges. A national supply chain shortage might threaten the entire operation. And so, the loop begins again. This is what personal evolution looks like, an upward, expanding spiral of continuous growth, where every conquered mountain only serves to reveal the next great peak. Chapter 5. The Inevitable Abyss. As you actively apply the 5 steps of evolution, setting goals, facing problems, diagnosing root causes, designing solutions, and executing them, a thrilling transformation takes place. You begin to ascend. You conquer mountains that once terrified you, and you find yourself standing at magnificent, unprecedented heights. But there is a dark, unyielding law of gravity that accompanies this upward spiral. As the heights you reach get greater, the falls you take get exponentially greater too. It is one thing to trip on a stone while walking through the valley. It is an entirely different experience to slip while scaling a sheer cliff face thousands of feet in the air. If you are going to live a life of high ambition, you must accept a terrifying truth. Terrible things happen to all of us. It is the inescapable tax on a life lived boldly. While everyday mistakes provide small, manageable gems of wisdom, there will inevitably come a moment in your life where you do not just crash, you are completely obliterated. Depending on how you handle these catastrophic moments, they possess the power to either permanently ruin you, sending you into a downward spiral of bitterness and retreat, or profoundly, beautifully improve you. Imagine a visionary founder who spends a decade building a revolutionary technology company. They assemble a brilliant, fiercely loyal team who believe entirely in the mission. After years of steady growth, the founder makes a massive, highly public bet on a bold prediction about the future of their industry. They write manifestos, convince investors to double down, and publicly stake their entire reputation on this singular direction. It is a wildly controversial view, but the founder is absolutely certain they are right. And then reality delivers a devastating blow. The founder is not just wrong, they are catastrophically, publicly wrong. The market shifts in the exact opposite direction. The product launches to total apathy. The revenue dries up overnight. The failure is not a quiet private misstep, it is a humiliating spectacle. The founder is forced to sit in a stark, quiet room and look into the eyes of the people they care about most, their earliest employees, their closest friends, and tell them that the company is dead and their jobs are gone. After the doors are locked, the founder is left completely alone, entirely drained of capital, forced to borrow money from family just to keep the lights on in their own home. This kind of failure feels like a physical assault. It is a stunning, disorienting blow to the head that leaves your ears ringing. In the dark, quiet hours of the night, this founder is paralyzed by a profound crisis of identity. Being so spectacularly wrong erases all the confidence built from previous victories. They look at the wreckage of their life and wonder if they should just surrender. They consider putting on a suit, abandoning their deeply held dreams of innovation, and taking a safe, quiet job where they will never have to risk this level of agony again. They look at the fundamental equation of life and feel that it is permanently broken. They can no longer see a path that provides the incredible rewards they desire without demanding an unacceptable, life-destroying level of risk. Something exactly like this will happen to you. It may not take the form of a public business collapse, but the emotional abyss will be identical. You will lose something or someone you are absolutely convinced you cannot live without. You will suffer a terrible, unforeseen illness or injury that shatters your physical reality. Your carefully planned career will disintegrate before your eyes. You will find yourself on the floor, staring at the ceiling, utterly convinced that your life as you knew it is permanently ruined and that there is absolutely no conceivable way to move forward. But it will pass. This is the hardest, most vital lesson of the abyss. The crushing weight of the present moment will eventually lift. The blinding panic that currently obscures your vision will fade. Whether you survive this nightmare and spiral upward, or whether you are crushed by it and spiral downward, depends entirely on whether you are willing to face the failure objectively. Even in the darkest, most terrifying valleys of your life, there is always a best path forward. You almost certainly cannot see it yet because your ego is bruised, your heart is broken, and your mind is clouded by grief. But the path is there. To find it, you must do the most difficult thing a human being can do in a moment of crisis. You must completely calm yourself down. You must quiet the screaming voice of despair, reflect on the cold, hard facts of your new situation, and embrace this terrible new reality. Only by accepting the absolute truth of where you are right now, no matter how much you hate it, can you begin to design the next steps that will eventually carry you out of the dark and back into the light. Chapter 6. The Universal Machine. When you are sitting in the wreckage of a massive failure, the pain you feel can actually become a profound catalyst, leading you to reflect on how the world truly works and helping to put your personal crisis into perspective. When you are drowning in the emotional agony of the abyss, it feels as though the universe has singled you out for punishment, acting with chaotic, malicious intent. But if you can force yourself to take a deep breath and dramatically zoom out from your immediate suffering, a breathtaking realization washes over you. You begin to see that absolutely everything that happens is simply a result of causes that make it happen. This means that all things that occur cause other things to occur, meaning reality functions exactly like a perpetual motion machine that goes on into eternity. To truly grasp this, you have to look back to the very beginning. At the moment of the Big Bang, all the fundamental laws and forces of the entire universe were propelled forward. These forces have been continuously interacting with each other as a massive perpetual motion machine where all the bits and pieces form smaller machines that work for a while, inevitably fall apart, and then reform into entirely new machines. When you look closely, you realize that everything is a machine. The magnificent structure and evolution of galaxies, the slow formation of our solar system, the complex ecosystems of our planet, the unpredictable movements of our economies and markets, and even each of us as individuals. We are literally biological machines made up of smaller machines, our circulatory system, our nervous system, and our digestive system, that actively produce our thoughts, our dreams, our emotions, and everything else we experience. All of these countless machines continuously evolve together to produce the exact realities we encounter every single day. While this might sound deeply philosophical, recognizing this interconnected reality is actually incredibly practical, because it immediately puts your personal struggles into perspective and helps you deal with your unique realities in a vastly better way. Consider a dedicated urban planner responsible for a thriving, beautiful coastal city. For 50 years, the city has experienced nothing but mild seasons and gentle tides. The planner builds infrastructure based entirely on this peaceful 50-year window. Then, without warning, a colossal, devastating storm hits the coastline, wiping out entire districts, destroying homes, and leaving the city in absolute ruin. In the immediate aftermath, the planner is paralyzed by despair, viewing the storm as a freak, unprecedented tragedy, a random curse from the heavens that no one could have possibly predicted. They feel uniquely victimized by nature, but then, as the emotional shock begins to wear off, the planner starts to dig into ancient geological records, deep-sea core samples, and centuries-old historical logs. They discover a staggering truth. This storm was not a random anomaly at all. Exactly 120 years prior, an identical storm had ravaged the same coastline, and another 120 years before that, the exact same phenomenon occurred. Through this lens, you will observe that almost everything happens over and over again in slightly different ways. Some of these occurrences happen in short-term cycles that are incredibly easy to recognize, like the predictable 24-hour day, while others happen so infrequently that they have not occurred within our own lifetimes, leaving us completely shocked when they finally do, like the devastating 100-year storm. As human beings, we are heavily biased by our recent history, causing us to carelessly overlook monumental events that haven't happened in a long time, especially if they haven't happened directly to us. But the cold mechanics of reality dictate that they absolutely will happen again. Once the urban planner realizes that the storm is just a mechanical function of the global climate machine, their entire psychological state shifts. The despair evaporates, replaced by clear-eyed determination. They stop mourning a random tragedy and start preparing for a predictable cycle. They redesign the city's seawalls, elevate the electrical grids, and construct natural buffer zones, all perfectly calibrated to withstand the massive pressure of the next inevitable cycle. By understanding the machine, they strip the fear out of the future. By adopting this macro perspective rather than seeing a chaotic, overwhelming flurry of random things coming at you, you can begin to see each event as simply just another one of those. Whether it is an economic recession, a bitter betrayal by a friend, or a sudden industry disruption, you stop reacting with shock. You will begin to clearly see the underlying cause and effect relationships that govern these events, allowing you to develop reliable principles for dealing with them that you can eventually express in both clear words and structured logic. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "Which part of the machine is operating right now, and what principle do I apply to navigate it?" This is the ultimate liberation from the chaos of life. Chapter 7: The Dangerous Jungle of Risk and Reward. Imagine standing at the edge of a beautifully manicured, perfectly safe clearing. The sun is shining, the grass is soft, and you have absolutely everything you need to survive. There are no predators here, no sudden storms, and no unexpected tragedies. This clearing represents the life of comfortable predictability. It is the steady job that pays the bills but does not challenge your mind. It is the pleasant, frictionless relationship that lacks deep, fiery passion. It is the predictable daily routine that guarantees you will never be publicly embarrassed or financially ruined. For many people, this clearing is the ultimate goal, and they will spend their entire lives defending their small patch of safe grass. But as you stand in this clearing, you look out across a vast, dark, and incredibly dense jungle. You know with absolute certainty that on the exact opposite side of this dangerous jungle lies a life that is truly spectacular. It is a life of immense, groundbreaking achievement, profound wealth, and unparalleled emotional fulfillment. It is the exact life you secretly dream about in your quietest moments. But between you and that magnificent life lies the jungle, and the jungle is terrifying. It is filled with venomous snakes of financial ruin, hidden pits of public humiliation, and predatory diseases of stress and failure. Here is the most agonizing, unavoidable truth of human existence. You cannot have the spectacular life without crossing the dangerous jungle. You are forced to make a brutal binary choice. You can either choose to stay completely safe in the clearing and accept an ordinary, unremarkable life, or you can risk terrible, agonizing pain to cross the jungle in pursuit of a fabulous life. There is no secret tunnel underneath the jungle. There is no helicopter that will safely drop you on the other side. Think of an incredibly talented teacher who has spent 20 years working in a stable, well-paying, but deeply flawed public school district. They have a guaranteed pension, excellent health insurance, and absolute job security. They are perfectly safe in their clearing. But this teacher has a radical, wildly untested vision for a completely new kind of educational system. One that could fundamentally transform the lives of marginalized children across the entire country. To actually build this vision, they cannot just work on it on the weekends. They have to quit their pension-backed job, drain their hard-earned life savings, and step into the absolute unknown of entrepreneurship. If they fail, they will be 50 years old, completely broke and publicly humiliated. If they succeed, they will change the world and experience a level of fulfillment most humans cannot even comprehend. When faced with this exact type of crossroad, most people immediately retreat. They feel the cold, sharp bite of fear, and they mistake that fear for a warning sign that they are doing the wrong thing. They convince themselves that the risk is simply too high, the predators are too vicious, and the clearing is actually not that bad. But what they fail to realize is that staying in the clearing carries its own invisible, highly lethal poison. It is the slow, suffocating poison of regret. Choosing safety often means slowly watching your own potential wither and die over decades until you reach the end of your life and realize you never actually found out who you could have been. If you decide that an ordinary life is unacceptable, if you summon the immense courage required to step into the tree line, you must immediately master the delicate life-or-death art of balancing risk and reward. Taking a massive risk does not mean you should act recklessly. The goal is not to run blindly into the darkest part of the jungle, making as much noise as possible and hoping for the best. That is not ambition, that is suicide. The goal is to deeply understand the exact nature of the risks you are taking and to systematically lower them while keeping your eyes locked on the immense reward. You do this by adopting a mindset of extreme, calculated caution while executing bold, decisive actions. You test the ground before you step. You study the patterns of the predators. You accept that you will get scratched, you will get bitten, and you will spend many terrifying nights shivering in the dark, but you refuse to expose yourself to a risk so large that it could permanently take you out of the game. A successful journey through the jungle requires you to be simultaneously the bravest person in the world and the most careful. As you push deeper into the dense undergrowth, facing challenges that seem insurmountable, you will inevitably reach a terrifying realization. No matter how smart you are, no matter how carefully you calculated the risks, your own two eyes are simply not enough to see every hidden danger. You have massive, glaring blind spots. And to survive the deepest parts of this jungle, you're going to have to confront the two greatest enemies you will ever face, and neither of them are hiding in the bushes. They are hiding entirely within your own mind. Chapter 8. The twin enemies within you have stepped into the dense undergrowth. You have accepted the massive risks necessary to achieve a magnificent life, and you are vigilantly watching the horizon for external predators, the sudden market crashes, the unreliable partners, the catastrophic industry shifts. But as you navigate this treacherous terrain, you will quickly discover a shocking truth. The forces most likely to completely destroy your journey are not hiding behind the trees. They are embedded deep within your own biology. To survive and ultimately thrive, you must identify and conquer two invisible, highly destructive barriers: the ego barrier and the blind spot barrier. These twin enemies are entirely natural to the human condition, but if left unchecked, they will permanently blind you to reality and ensure your failure. Let us examine the ego first. When people hear the word ego, they often picture a cartoonishly arrogant person loudly boasting about their accomplishments. But the ego barrier is far more insidious, deeply rooted, and universal than simple vanity. It is a primitive defense mechanism housed in the oldest parts of your brain. Millions of years ago, when our ancient ancestors faced imminent physical threats, a predatory animal, or a violently hostile rival, this primitive part of the brain flooded their bodies with adrenaline, triggering an intense fight-or-flight response to keep them alive. Today, you are rarely chased by wild animals, but your primitive brain has not updated its ancient software. It literally cannot distinguish between a physical threat to your life and an intellectual threat to your deeply held opinions. Imagine a brilliant, highly seasoned creative director at a major advertising agency. For 20 years, their creative intuition has been flawless. They have won prestigious awards and built an ironclad reputation as an untouchable visionary. One afternoon, they proudly present their latest, most cherished campaign to their team. A quiet, newly hired data analyst raises their hand and gently points out that recent demographic research completely contradicts the core premise of the campaign. The hard numbers clearly show that the target audience will actually find the messaging deeply alienating. What happens inside the creative director's body in that exact fraction of a second? Their heart rate spikes, their chest tightens, their blood pressure surges. They are not experiencing a logical, professional disagreement. Their primitive brain is screaming that they are under a lethal physical attack. Instead of calmly looking at the data to see if it is true, the director lashes out. They aggressively question the young analyst's experience, raise their voice, and fiercely defend the flawed campaign. In that critical moment, the director's ego has violently hijacked their rational mind. Their desperate biological need to be right has completely overpowered their need to find out what is actually true. If you cannot recognize this exact physiological reaction within yourself, if you cannot learn to pause, breathe, and actively override that primitive hostility when someone points out your mistakes, you will remain fiercely loyal to your own ignorance. But even if you miraculously manage to completely subdue your ego, you will immediately run into the second equally formidable enemy, the blind spot barrier. This barrier is not born of defensive anger or pride. It is simply a matter of unavoidable biological reality. Every single human being is wired entirely differently. We each possess a unique neurological framework that rigidly dictates how we perceive the world. Some people naturally see grand, sweeping possibilities and future visions, but they are completely blind to the meticulous, practical details required to execute them. Other people are intensely focused on the immediate facts and figures right in front of them, but they literally cannot perceive the broader, long-term implications of their actions. You would never ask a person who is entirely colorblind to distinguish between subtle shades of crimson and scarlet, yet we constantly expect ourselves to perfectly assess complex situations that fall completely outside our natural cognitive abilities. Consider two highly capable leaders trying to navigate a severe, unexpected crisis within a large manufacturing company. A critical piece of custom machinery has violently broken down, halting all production worldwide. The operations manager, whose brain is heavily wired for immediate, linear problem-solving, looks at the crisis and sees a purely mechanical issue. They demand that the engineers work through the night, running themselves into the ground to fix the gears and restore the workflow immediately, entirely blind to the immense human toll this will take. Across the room, the human resources director, naturally wired for deep emotional empathy, looks at the exact same crisis and sees exhausted, demoralized employees on the verge of a dangerous burnout. They demand that the team be sent home to rest, entirely blind to the fact that missing another day of production will permanently bankrupt the company and cost everyone their livelihoods. Both leaders are looking at the exact same broken machine. Both are absolutely convinced they see the complete, undeniable picture. And both of them are dangerously wrong, because they are only seeing the highly specific slice of reality that their unique biology allows them to see. If you stubbornly insist on navigating the jungle of life using only your own deeply flawed, highly limited perspective, you are guaranteed to step off a cliff you simply could not see. Recognizing that your own brain is fundamentally flawed, that your ego will aggressively fight the truth, and that your blind spots will completely hide it from you, is a terrifying realization. It completely shatters the comfortable illusion that you can figure everything out entirely on your own. But it is also the most liberating realization you can possibly have. Because the moment you accept that you cannot see everything, you realize exactly what you must do to survive. You must stop trying to see the entire world through your own two eyes, and you must learn the profoundly powerful art of borrowing the eyes of others. Chapter 9. The Power of the Collective Mind. Once you deeply accept the terrifying reality that your ego will aggressively lie to you and your blind spots will silently hide the cliff from you, you reach a profound turning point in your life. You realize that your own two eyes, no matter how sharp or experienced, will never be enough to safely navigate the deepest, darkest parts of the jungle. You must learn to borrow the eyes of others. But doing this effectively is not as simple as just casually asking for advice over a cup of coffee. It requires a fundamental, almost unnatural shift in your entire cognitive architecture. You must transition from a state of desperately wanting to be proven right to a state of desperately wanting to find out what is actually true. This shift is the absolute essence of radical open-mindedness. For most of our lives, we are strictly conditioned by society and schools to believe that having the right answers makes us smart and successful, while being wrong makes us weak and foolish. But the moment you encounter a real-world problem that is significantly bigger than your own cognitive capacity, holding on to that fragile belief will destroy you. Radical open-mindedness means completely replacing the primitive joy of winning an argument with the profound, life-saving joy of discovering your own ignorance before it kills you. It means intentionally, actively seeking out the smartest, most capable people you can find who fundamentally disagree with your perspective, specifically so you can test your logic against theirs. Imagine a seasoned, highly respected trial lawyer preparing for the most important case of their entire career. The stakes are monumental, involving the permanent freedom of a client who has trusted them implicitly. The lawyer spends 6 exhausting months building a brilliant, airtight narrative. They feel the thrilling, intoxicating rush of certainty. Their ego whispers that the defense strategy is absolutely flawless. An ordinary lawyer would proudly walk into the courtroom wearing this certainty like armor, blindly hoping it holds up under the harsh lights of the prosecution. But a radically open-minded lawyer does something entirely different and deeply uncomfortable. 2 weeks before the trial begins, they assemble a room full of the most ruthless, brilliant, and cynical legal minds they know. They present their entire beloved case, hand over their sensitive files, and give these colleagues a single devastating instruction: destroy my argument, find the fatal flaw, tear down everything I have built. When the colleagues inevitably begin to dismantle the case, pointing out glaring inconsistencies, the lawyer's primitive brain screams in pure agony. The ego flares up like a sudden fire, desperate to aggressively defend the months of hard work. But the lawyer forcefully bites their tongue. They force themselves to stay perfectly quiet, to take notes, and to truly hear the brutal critique. Through this agonizing process, they realize that one of their key witnesses has a massive, fatal vulnerability that they completely missed due to their own emotional blind spots. By allowing their beautiful theory to be violently challenged in the absolute safety of a conference room, they save their client from a catastrophic ambush in the actual courtroom. The colleagues were not attacking the lawyer's worth as a human being. They were attacking the problem. This brings us to the profound and highly delicate art of thoughtful disagreement. Most people view any form of disagreement as a bloody battlefield where one person must conquer and the other must submit. But when two radically open-minded people disagree, it is not a war at all. It is a synchronized investigative dance of exploration. They are not trying to proudly convince each other. They are trying to jointly discover a hidden truth that neither of them could clearly see alone. To do this, you must permanently decouple your self-worth from your ideas. You must learn to say, I think this is the absolute best path forward, but I know I am deeply flawed and might be completely wrong, so let us test it together. When you can genuinely operate this way, you instantly remove the toxic, exhausting friction from human collaboration. You stop fighting the people standing next to you, and you start fighting the shared obstacles standing in front of you. When you scale this incredible kind of thoughtful disagreement across an entire group of people, you create one of the most unstoppable forces in human existence, an idea meritocracy. An idea meritocracy is not a traditional corporate hierarchy where the person with the fanciest title or the loudest voice automatically dictates the path. It is also not a pure idealistic democracy where every single opinion is given equal weight, regardless of whether the person has any actual expertise in the subject. Both of those extreme systems are deeply structurally flawed. In a true idea meritocracy, the singular uncompromising goal is to build a system where the absolute best ideas naturally rise to the top and win, regardless of who whispered them. To make this collective mind function, you have to meticulously weigh people's opinions based on their believability. A highly believable person is someone who has repeatedly, verifiably, and successfully solved the exact type of problem you are currently facing and who can clearly and logically explain the mechanics of how they did it. If you suddenly need life-saving neurological surgery, you do not take a democratic vote among your friendly neighbors to decide where the surgeon should make the incision, nor do you stubbornly trust your own internet research. You find a surgeon who has flawlessly performed that specific operation 1,000 times, and you heavily weight their proven opinion over your own terrifying ignorance. This sounds ridiculously obvious in matters of life and death, but we tragically forget it in business, in relationships, and in life. We stubbornly cling to our own unproven amateur opinions instead of humbly surrendering to the proven expertise of others. Living in an idea meritocracy and actively practicing radical open-mindedness removes the incredibly heavy, suffocating burden of having to know everything yourself. It is deeply, fundamentally exhausting to walk through life pretending to be an invincible genius. When you finally admit that your individual brain is just one small, fragile piece of a much larger, magnificent collective intelligence, you experience a profound sense of physical and emotional relief. You transform from a lonely, terrified solo explorer into a masterful conductor of a grand symphony. You realize that you do not need to know how to flawlessly play every single instrument in the orchestra. You only need to know how to bring the absolute best musicians together, listen closely to their unique notes, and harmonize their incredible, diverse talents. And once you master this beautiful collective power, the mountains that used to terrify you become completely manageable, and your focus naturally begins to shift towards something much larger than your own survival. Chapter 10. The Arc of a Meaningful Life. Think about the moment you finally hold the magnificent prize you have spent a lifetime bleeding for. You fought through the treacherous jungle, you confronted your deepest internal demons, you learned to harness the brilliant minds of those around you, and you finally arrived at the exact destination you always dreamed of. The applause rings out. The wealth is secured. The status is achieved. But inevitably, the applause dies down. The lights go out in the arena. You wake up the next morning, sit quietly with your coffee, and a very strange, profound realization washes over you. The thrill of the victory is already beginning to fade. The shiny rewards that motivated you through decades of agonizing struggle suddenly feel remarkably hollow. This is not a tragedy, nor is it a sign of ingratitude. It is the final, most beautiful biological shift in human evolution, and understanding it is the key to achieving ultimate peace. Nature possesses a brilliant, almost mischievous mechanism for driving progress. It uses our deeply held, often selfish desires as bait to trick us into evolving. When we are young, we fiercely chase our own personal success. We want the money, the recognition, the grand title, and the corner office. To get those things, we are forced to invent new solutions, build great companies, create beautiful art, and push the boundaries of human capability. The universe gets the magnificent progress it demands, and in return, we get our shiny little toys. But eventually, if you play the game long enough and successfully enough, the absolute joy of getting things for yourself completely diminishes. You realize that you can only eat so many luxurious meals, sleep in so many beautiful beds, and wear so many fine clothes before the law of diminishing returns strips the joy away from all of it. Consider a brilliant, fiercely competitive cardiovascular surgeon who has spent 40 years pioneering a miraculous, life-saving operating technique. For their entire career, their fire was fueled by pure, unadulterated ambition. They wanted their name in every medical journal. They wanted to be recognized as the absolute best in the world. They fiercely guarded their operating room, refusing to let anyone else take the lead. And they won. They achieved global fame. But as they enter the twilight of their career, a quiet, unexpected shift occurs inside them. One morning they step back from the operating table and hand the scalpel to a young, terrified, but brilliant protege they have been training. The older surgeon stands back and watches. They watch the young doctor flawlessly execute the miraculous technique. And in that quiet observation, the older surgeon feels a sudden, overwhelming surge of pure joy. A joy that completely eclipses any award they ever won for themselves. This is the great shift in perspective. You transition from wanting to be the successful hero of the story to desperately wanting others to be successful without you. You transition from loving the shiny toys to loving the incredible, eternal machine of evolution itself. When you look back at the grand sweep of human existence, you can see that every single one of us moves through three distinct, inevitable phases of life. The first phase is the era of dependence. We are children, utterly reliant on the giants around us. We are blank slates, absorbing knowledge, learning to walk, and leaning on others for our basic survival and direction. We are being prepared for the jungle, but we are safely kept in the clearing. Then comes the second phase, the era of fierce independence. This is where most of the dramatic action happens. We break away from our protectors, we step into the thick, terrifying undergrowth. We take massive risks, we crash, we suffer, we reflect, and we build our own empires. We are the main characters of our own epic movies. Our primary obsession is our own capability, our own survival, and our own ultimate success. For many people, the journey violently stops here. They become permanently trapped in the second phase, fiercely holding on to their power until their final breath, terrified of becoming irrelevant. But if you are truly wise, and if you have successfully extracted the deepest gems of truth from your struggles, you gracefully, willingly enter the third and final phase. In this phase, you are no longer the hero, you become the guide. Your entire purpose shifts from acquiring power to giving it away. You realize that your own individual life is incredibly short and fragile, but the principles you have discovered are immortal. Your greatest ambition is no longer to fight your way to the top of the mountain, but to build a smooth, beautifully lit road so the next generation can run up the mountain effortlessly. You want to pass your compass to someone who is just waking up in their boat. There is an immense, unspeakable peace in reaching this third phase. When you accept that you are just one tiny, temporary piece of a grand, eternal machine, you stop fighting the natural flow of time. You realize that your ultimate legacy is not the money you leave behind, nor the buildings with your name on them. Your ultimate legacy is the invisible structure of truth and principles you pass down to the people you love, allowing them to navigate their own storms long after you are gone. The river of time never stops moving. The current is powerful, and the encounters with reality will continue to rush toward you. But you are no longer afraid of the water. You know how to read the currents, you know how to survive the rapids, and you know how to build a beautiful life from the raw materials of reality. The journey is yours. Steer well,